Welcome to the Peak of Geek, where we've hit the top but with no plans to stop. What's your favorite thing about playing a video game? Is it the gameplay? Is it the story? Or is it something else that's almost impossible to describe? I'm sure I'm not the only one, but I call this game feel. And there are only a handful of games out there that are not just fun to play, but awesome to experience. And one of the games I think about often and revisit as often as I can is Alan Wake from Remedy.
Remedy is a game developer based in Finland, known primarily for cinematic single-player action games, but their first project was Death Rally, a vehicle combat racing game released for MS-DOS in 1996. During development, the team hired Sam Lake as a writer and eventual creative director. 5 years later, the team would release Max Payne, a third-person shooter classic that was heavily inspired by the film noir genre and the box office smash movie The Matrix. It famously borrowed the slow-motion bullet time movement style as a major gameplay mechanic.
Max Payne is one of the greatest action games of the early 2000s. You play as an NYPD cop who's hell-bent on getting revenge for the death of his family while investigating a strange new drug called Valkyr. Diving in slow motion with guns blazing is what many remember as the highlight of the game, but for me, it's all about those voiced comic book panel cutscenes. And yes, that's Sam Lake, modeling Max, who became unintentionally famous for making the Max Payne face.
Instead of going with costly pre-rendered cutscenes to tell the game's story, the team wisely decided to use fully voiced comic book panels. This was easily Max Payne's most defining feature and would kick off Remedy's tendency to go for a unique mixed media approach with their games.
Following the success of Max Payne, the team would release a sequel 2 years later, adding a secondary playable character and love interest in the form of Mona Sachs. The game was a little bit shorter than the original, but it was just as fun to play, and the bullet time gameplay and comic book panel cutscenes made a return. Soon after, while recovering from the crunch of Max Payne 2, the team started developing concepts for a new project.
What would follow is the 7-year journey to Alan Wake, a psychological horror action game with a concept created by Sam Lake. Come to think about it, Alan Wake is the first game I remember being excited about. In the mid-2000s, I would frequent the Alan Wake website to learn the latest news and pore over the amazing-looking screenshots. I would literally dream about exploring this small town.
Originally, Remedy planned for the town of Bright Falls, where the game takes place, to be an open-world sandbox-style environment similar to the Grand Theft Auto series of games, complete with a dynamic day and night cycle. Even at this early stage of development, light and darkness were already such important parts of the game.
By 2006, Remedy had announced their partnership with Microsoft Game Studios to deliver Alan Wake exclusively for the Xbox 360. Over the next 4 years of development, things changed, and eventually, the open-world concept was replaced with a tighter but more linear approach that helped the team focus on the narrative. The finished product would be broken down into episodes, as inspired by the cliffhanger endings and last episode recaps of popular TV shows at the time like Lost. Other inspirations would include the TV series Twin Peaks and the works of Stephen King. I mean, they name-dropped the guy less than 5 minutes into the game, with a reference to Kubrick's adaptation of The Shining popping up a bit later. Originally, Alan Wake would have released in an episodic format, but it was ultimately decided to release the full game on disc.
This was absolutely for the best. We did not need another Half-Life 2 situation on our hands. R.I.P. to Episode 3. Now don't get me wrong, Half-Life Alyx in VR was a great game, but I'm still holding out hope that one day we'll find out what happened to our pal Gordon Freeman. Anyway.
Alan Wake would eventually hit store shelves in 2010, and for many, it would come to define the third-person narrative experience. Some may point to the Uncharted series from Naughty Dog, who had released a sequel the year before, and I'll be the first to admit my love for those games, but I would argue that the story of Uncharted is not why you play it. There's enough there to get you from action set piece A to action set piece B, but the experience is very much like playing a popcorn movie. Alan Wake, on the other hand, puts the story front and center. It brings you into its eerie world, surrounds you with the mood and mysterious forests of the Pacific Northwest, and creates an atmosphere and feeling that's all its own.
Alan Wake follows a writer in the vein of Stephen King, who pens best-selling thriller novels. Unfortunately, he's having a case of writer's block, and his wife Alice decides they need a change of scenery. So they leave their New York apartment and head to the small town of Bright Falls. Soon after, Alice mysteriously disappears, and while trying to find out what happened to her, Alan must battle supernatural forces straight from a book he doesn't remember writing. Soon you'll find yourself armed with a revolver and a flashlight. Welcome to the gunplay of Alan Wake. It's a little arcadey, but it's so much fun.
The game's main theme of light versus darkness, sorry Kingdom Hearts, we're not talking about you today, is tied directly into the game's combat. When fighting the supernatural Taken, humanoid monsters covered in darkness, you must first burn the darkness off with your flashlight before you can shoot them down. When it is time to fire away, there's no reticle like in most third-person shooters. Here, you aim with your flashlight to pop off your shots. Headshots aren't actually important here, but shotguns and rifles are stronger and faster at dispatching your foes. While reloading ammo in your guns, you'll also be reloading batteries in your flashlight, while using flare guns and flashbangs for bigger enemies or to help with crowd control. It all combines together to create a unique combat system that's never been replicated.
But where this game truly shines, at least for me, extends outside of the gameplay and into the choices Remedy made to complement how this game tells its story and crafts its world.
Calling back to Max Payne's graphic novel voiceover scenes, in Alan Wake you're constantly finding pages from the novel Alan doesn't remember writing, and they seem to narrate everything that's happening. Sometimes these passages give you a hint of what's coming up next, or sometimes they give you a bit of backstory on a different character. Yes, okay, it's all very meta, but here it works surprisingly well.
Another unique element in this game has to do with all the radios and TVs you find scattered all over Bright Falls.
The radios play clips of a broadcast by Pat Maine, an old disc jockey you meet at the beginning of the game, while the TVs either give us glimpses of a live-action Alan Wake slowly descending into madness, or they show us mini-episodes of a show called Night Springs, which is very clearly inspired by The Twilight Zone. Some of these live-action mini-episodes coincide with the plot of the game, but most of the time, they're just adding to the atmosphere.
And strangely enough, hunting down these radios and TVs are some of my favorite parts of this game. You never know what sort of strange things you're going to hear or see. And this is what I meant earlier by game feel. If you took these interactive sections out of the game, it wouldn't change the gameplay or the story, but they absolutely add to it and help make this game such a memorable experience.
There was also a promotional live-action web series called Bright Falls that helped introduce the world and some of the characters you'll meet. It stars a newspaper reporter who experiences a lot of strange things and then vanishes right before Alan and Alice Wake arrive to kick off the game.
Meeting and interacting with the citizens and locations of Bright Falls is another unique aspect to this game, and something that wasn't prevalent in other action games, at least not at this time. There are several sections in Alan Wake where you're not just heading towards the next combat encounter or solving the next puzzle.
Instead, you're free to explore the detailed world Remedy spent so long putting together. You can talk to people, explore various interactive points of interest, and maybe even start to believe that Bright Falls is a real place. The voice acting, music choices, and overall sound design are all top-notch. Whether you're taking in the sights on that first boat into town, meeting the locals at the Oh Dear Diner, or chatting to the cops and local drunk at the sheriff's station. The contemporary small-town setting really feels like you've walked right onto the set of Twin Peaks.
Alan Wake would receive 2 pieces of downloadable content, and then a spin-off 2 years later called Alan Wake's American Nightmare. This shorter, more combat-focused experience released as an Xbox Live Arcade title, but actually included ideas from the cancelled Alan Wake 2.
If you look up the prototype footage of Alan Wake 2 from before American Nightmare, you'll notice a lot of similarities. Either way, the game we actually got leaned into the fictional Night Springs TV show from the first game and used it as a framing device this time around. Overall, this was a fun little action game with some intriguing story bits, but the horror elements were mostly gone, and it felt like more of a teaser instead of the sequel us fans knew we deserved.
Unfortunately, we would have to wait over 10 years and counting to finally see Alan Wake return for a sequel.
In the meantime, Remedy would move on to other projects. While the team was initially interested in developing a full sequel to Alan Wake, Microsoft wanted another original title, and 4 years later, Quantum Break would be released. For this outing, Sam Lake shared directing duties, but didn't put his pen to the paper for this new narrative-focused action game that traded horror for science fiction.
The team would continue to merge the barrier between video games and live-action storytelling even further with Quantum Break, where players take control of Jack Joyce, a man granted time manipulation powers after a time travel experiment goes horribly wrong.
But that doesn't mean Remedy completely forgot about Alan Wake. Near the beginning of Quantum Break, there's a blackboard dedicated to the plot of Alan's journey, including a strange Easter egg that will make a bit more sense later on. There's also a classic live-action clip playing on a TV that features both Alan Wake and Sam Lake. But the developers didn't stop at incorporating live-action scenes on in-game TVs. Throughout Quantum Break, players could watch full live-action episodes that are affected by choices made throughout the game. There's no denying this was a very ambitious game that was very fun to play, but the live-action TV episodes were a bit clunky when compared to similar sci-fi series airing at the time.
3 years later, Remedy would release its most successful and fastest-selling game since Max Payne with Control. In it, you play as Jesse Faden, the director of the Federal Bureau of Control, an organization that studies worldwide paranormal phenomena from within a skyscraper called the Oldest House.
Sam Lake returned to concept design and writing, but contrary to every other Remedy game, Control was designed in a non-linear fashion with Metroidvania-style gameplay where players are free to explore at their own pace. While exploring, you may even come across a few references to a certain missing writer you may recognize.
That's right, in the world of Control, Alan Wake happened, and they both exist in the same universe. Thank you, Sam Lake!
This fact would be further cemented with the release of the AWE expansion, which brought characters and events from Alan Wake into the world of Control. At some point towards the end of this downloadable experience, Jesse learns of a new paranormal event, one that's mysteriously a few years away in the future.
This was a clear nod that Remedy wasn't quite done with the world of Alan Wake.
And sure enough, in 2021, the team would announce and release a remaster of Alan Wake for a whole new generation of players, before also announcing a full-blown sequel at the Game Awards later that year.
As of the filming of this video, we are about a month away from the release of Alan Wake 2, and to say that I'm excited would be a complete understatement. I love Remedy's games, but Alan Wake holds such a special place in my heart. But what about you? What games make you feel this way, that go beyond the realms of gameplay and story to become something that's truly special? Let me know down in the comments below, and until next time, I can't wait to find out what Alan has been up to.